make the consumer, make the person eating the food connect with what they are eating, which is essentially knowing three answers about what they are eating: who is growing, where, and how. And for a farmlet or a kitchen garden, that's very obviously known. But even for other things that we're eating, the fruits, the grains, the pulses, who is growing it, from where is it coming from, how is it grown, what was the process of growing it, is it grown keeping, of course, the organic processes in mind, but also are they taking care of the land, the water around them.
So this episode is all about building confidence and increasing consumer awareness around organic and sustainable farming. This is an interesting episode, so stay tuned for the full conversation. Hello and a big warm welcome to yet another episode on the Mission Shunya podcast. First things first, hope you are doing well. I can't thank you enough for all your support in helping spread the podcast and its theme of getting to net zero carbon economy to a wider audience. The easiest way to do that is to share the link or write a review on any podcast platform that you listen to this on. That helps in the show's discoverability. Well, when I talk about the show's discoverability, it's not just about the new listeners. It has also helped in being noticed by other startups, entrepreneurs, and other agencies who have an interesting story to share and feel that the theme aligns with their work, which is a very good sign. Which leads me to a range of different topics and stories that I can choose from to cover on episode. So again, thank you very much for that. Talking of topics and themes, I have been thinking about food systems and its carbon impact. And to an extent, I have been buying local produce. But I always had apprehensions of the claims of reducing carbon footprint, etc. So what do we do? If possible, grow local. Well, you might think that's not a good option or the right option, but I'm sure after listening to our guest, you'll definitely incline towards that. So let's get to the conversation with our guest, who is...
Hi, I'm Kapil. I'm founder of Edible Roots. We are based in Delhi and we help people grow food in urban spaces.
So Kapil, before we get to the story of Edible Roots, now how did your journey from a consultant to get into farming begin? Like, what was the trigger point for you?
I had been in the consulting area for about 4 or 5 years, around which time when I made this decision. The trigger was basically a point came to me where I realized that what I was doing is not I can do for the rest of my life. It's not something that I'm passionate about. It's not something that fulfills me. And that led me to further introspect and figure out what is it that I want to do. And through that process, I figured that my passion areas and my interest areas lie around food, health, and through discussion with a few mentors and guides and family and friends, I at least narrowed it down to maybe starting with organic farming, because it sort of connects food and health together. And luckily, our family had some land back in Gujarat at that time. I was in the US when this was going on. And the decision was made that, okay, I'll come back and at least start farming on this land and then see where the journey takes me. So it was sort of a leap of faith in that sense. And that's how the journey started.
That's interesting on two fronts. One, of course, the leap of faith. It's a big leap. And the second one, interestingly, moving back from the US and then returning to Gujarat of all states and then getting to farming. That's really an interesting story. And that kind of says like the passion that you had towards finding a true purpose in life.
Yes, I was definitely driven to figure that out, what is it? Because what dawned to me around this time of my life was that if somebody wants to be truly fulfilled and happy through their life, then the only way, and I think this is the most common denominator, there might be many other factors to a happy life, but this is the foundation of it, and that is you have to be doing something that fulfills you, that you're passionate about, that you feel purposeful about, and that's why it was no other option was there for me. I had to figure out what I want to do.
That's fair. I mean, that's true in a sense, because we hear about this story, especially on this channel, that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they make this shift from their regular work, they are driven to this. And as most of them have also said, that it is the push that they ultimately find and then they make this call. But yours was totally different. So how did you get onto this? Like, what kind of training? And I kind of figured out that you had land, but you never had the knowledge of farming. So how did you get started with this?
That is true. The family, while they had the land, they were not farming the land for many decades. So the knowledge or the experience of farming did not exist. So initially, it was all just hearing to people around in the village where we had the land, and looking at the farmers, what they're doing, asking them to suggest things. Even I found a few consultants who were around at that time who were not really farming, but they were consultants to help others do their farming. So I took advice from them. I made a lot of mistakes,
Hmm.
a lot of expensive mistakes, a lot of money in the money of the family was spent. And but I think the path that I eventually figured out, which took me maybe a year or two to sort of realize, was to find the best farmers around me and around the country who are already doing what I wanted to do. And once I figured that out, then essentially I spent time with them. I spent lots of time with them. Whether they were organic farmers or chemical farmers, there's a certain thought process, there's a certain mindset that a farmer carries, that comes through them in their blood as they are farming for generations. And that can only be imbibed, of course, one through decades and years and generations of farming, but also it can be shortened by spending time, by understanding how they think, what they are looking, what they're observing. So while I visited almost 100 farmers across the country, I spent time with them. And when I say spent, it doesn't mean hours, it meant days. I spent days with them and observed them, learned from them. But most importantly, I found the best farmer in our village and made good friends with him. He also enjoyed my company. And practically every day, 2 to 3 hours, I spent with him on his field. He visited my farm. And through that process for over 2 3 years, that's how the deeper understandings of what farming is and how the farming works sort of came across. I mean, and it's still a learning process. I'm still learning. I think it's a long journey, but I think the journey got shorter and quicker because of that.
Fair. If you double down on your efforts and put in the hours, I'm sure there's a lot of learning that you can take up, especially when you're starting. And when you're starting, you have the initial excitement. So the learning curve is probably steep. And if you double down on putting the time, it could be better. You did mention about organic farming a couple of times. So for a layman, like when you started off, what was the differentiating factor between the organic farming and the traditional farming that you saw at that point in time?
See, at the beginning, it was as simple as food without chemicals,
Hmm.
and that comes in many forms today. One is, of course, the way it's grown, which is with the use of pesticides or chemical fertilizers. But now we have also a lot of adulteration that happens after the food has grown, in terms of ripening it, storing it, transporting it, to make it viable for that or to make it look attractive. A lot of things happen after the produce has been harvested or while it's getting transported. So all of these various ways we tamper with our food is essentially what I would say was my initial understanding of eating organic food, and that still stays true today. But of course, it has much more dimensions of understanding now. It's not only about food without chemicals; it's also about taking care of the land, the soil, the water, the environment, the other species that we have around us. Also, creating a model of fair share, in the sense, is the output just for my own self benefit, or is it also benefiting the community? Is it also benefiting the consumer who's eating it? Is there because one of the common things that I noticed was that the organic produce was very expensive, almost 2 3 times the normal conventional produce, and it's still the
True,
case in most cases.
true, true.
So why should that be the case? And I think figuring that out, because I think that's part of what truly organic means. I mean, somebody grows organic here in India or in some part of India and then exports it via flight to America or Europe or Middle East. Is that food still organic? Because just the amount of carbon footprint that food will carry is exorbitant. So there are now many dimensions through which the lenses through which we can analyze whether the food is truly organic or not. But in a very basic sense, it's food without chemicals.
You did mention about price, and that is something that even I have been trying to figure out. Organic food, is it really expensive, or can we expect the prices to decline in the future? Or what are the dimensions that are playing that ensures that the prices are like viable compared to other alternatives? Where do you see this panning out? Are the prices going to be high, or is it expected to come down based on more people taking up the practice?
I think there are various elements to it. What I understand, one is of course the idea of supply and demand. I feel somewhere at least the demand is out there in the cities, and the supply is not matching up to it. But when I actually meet the farmers, I still travel a lot and I meet farmers. I see most of them have surplus. Most of them have excess of what they're growing, and they are always struggling to find a buyer for it.
Okay.
So in a way, it's sort of a catch-22, and we don't know where the real problem lies. But I also feel the other spectrum of this lies in the way the supply chain works, and this is across conventional or organic. There's a huge chain, a lot of middlemen from where the food grows to the consumer, to the consumer's plate. And because of this long chain, I think that's where the cost goes high, because there's losses, there's margins that each person or the each vendor along the journey wants it, and I think because of that the food becomes expensive. So what we have been doing as Edible Roots is also finding ways to shorten this journeys, how to bring the consumer closer to the farmer. That has been the sort of the foundational idea behind what we do, is to make the consumer know about the food that they're eating, bringing them as close to that as possible, without the middlemen, without the whole chain of events that happen in between. And I think that's the only way, I think, in the long run, in a sustainable way, where the farmer will still benefit, where they don't have to forego what they are putting in terms of effort and materials and money, and at the same time the consumer gets the good end of the deal. That becomes a win-win, not only in terms of a better price for the consumer and a better price for the farmer, but also better quality and less waste of the produce, because the food has to travel less, it has to reach directly from farmer to the consumer directly, much faster. So the many other benefits to it as well, in terms of having food surplus, less wastage, more fresh. So all of those things get taken care of, along with the better price for the farmer and the consumer. So I think that's where the answer lies. I don't think it's anywhere near in the future, but I think that's where it will happen, if it does happen.
That's good to know. In the value chain is currently has a lot of gaps where there are a lot of actors trying to take advantage of this position of calling or labeling a product organic and then tapping into that. So yeah, as you said, if a lot of players come up in the market, especially farmers who grow organic, then I'm sure it can come to be mainstream. So that is good. Now we'll get to the story of Edible Roots. So one value proposition that you wanted to bring right from the start was to get people involved. So how did you go about starting this, what you called so-called community supported agriculture? How did that idea come about?
So this was in the initial years when I first started farming. I still remember one of the first crops I had taken at the farm was about 5 acres of tomatoes I had grown, and this was after 3, maybe 4 months of me returning back from the US, starting to farm, and then this was one of the first harvests I was getting. And I got a really good harvest. I took the harvest. I asked, where should I sell? They said, take it to the mandi, the local market. I went there, and the best quality tomatoes went for about 2-3 rupees a kilo. The ones that were not the best quality, like B grade or C grades, they didn't even sell. So that was an eye opener for me, because at that price, even meeting the transport cost from the farm to the mandi was not being met, let alone the cost of growing it, the labor, the materials, the seeds, the manure, and your own sweat and effort. So that got me thinking, and this sort of had been going on, kept happening for a few months or a year or two. In about year two, we got a harvest of papaya, and while we were still mostly selling to the mandi, I used to take the produce also home to my family and the extended family. So some family friends got to eat that papayas from our home, and they asked me, a few of them asked me, that is it possible that we can get your papayas directly to us, because when we go to the market, we don't know which one is yours and which one isn't. So I said, sure. They lived. It's a small town. They lived close by. I said, sure, I'll bring it once or twice a week, and and I'll give it to you. So that's sort of the first chance sort of incident happened and then this is where the price point that I mentioned earlier also happened, that the papayas were selling at the time in the market for say 40-45 rupees a kilo. I was selling it at the mandi at about 6-7 rupees a kilo.
Wow, big gap.
So I proposed to these people who were buying from us directly that I'll give it to you for about say 25 rupees a kilo. That's still 4 times what I would get in the mandi, and much below the market price of the conventional produce at 45 rupees a kilo. So organic was being sold cheaper because it was going directly from me, the grower, to the consumer. So that was the first incident, and that sort of struck a light bulb in my head that this is what I should explore. Nobody else is doing it. So gradually, the word spread, and we started growing a variety. So then I realized that rather than growing one thing in a large quantity, it's better to grow many things in small quantities, because then I can target the same consumer for all the things. So gradually, the growing and the farming practices changed. We started growing a diverse range of vegetables and fruits that could grow in the conditions that we had at that farm, and we built a database of people around the families around the city, and gradually a whole community was formed over a year or two, and that's when the farm became sustained in terms of economic sense. Until then, it was all losing money. So that was the turning point. That's where I saw the light in this long tunnel where I was constantly losing money and didn't know where I was going. So it was by chance, but that's how the community started. And then once the word spreads, then it was and then we also opened a little shop at the farm, because our farm was on a highway. So a lot of the farm, the road traffic stopped by at the farm, and they bought directly from there. So then we didn't even have the transport cost. So we sold it even cheaper because it was being sold right at the farm. And then we also started doing some value addition, like we used to grow sugar cane, so we used to offer sugar cane juice. We used to grow Mosambi, so we used to offer Mosambi juice. So basically, trying to bring the consumer closer, and that's the underlying theme you'll see across this. That as the consumer came close to the farm, it became beneficial for them, for us, and the produce was sold in a much better price for both of us as well.
That's a good example that you bring about illustrating that why the price is high currently and what is the differentiating factor that you bought into this. And as you rightly said, the more closer you bring to the plate, then the consumer will definitely feel the difference and feel the quality as well. The quality is, of course, a big differentiating factor. So this was just the start. But then you started this as a big business practice. You started allowing subscribing to farmlets, as you call it. So how did that scale up happen? And you also moved geographies when you started this practice. So how did that transition happen?
So you have almost jumped a decade, I would say, in that, because it wasn't straight from this to that. Essentially, so this small community farm that we created in Jamnagar, the town in Gujarat, that went on for a few years, for about 5-6 years. Then a few friends in and around started asking me to help with their kitchen gardens, like a balcony garden or a rooftop garden. And mostly I shunned the idea, saying that I've been growing on acres, larger acres, and what can you grow in a balcony? But some people persisted, so I had to help them out. They were family and friends, and one of the first few experiments I did, I failed drastically. I grew chilies and basil in my aunt's backyard, which would typically grow in about 2 months on the farm, but in their backyard it never grew. It grew, but it never gave any fruit or harvest. So that sort of made me curious about it, and I started studying. And what I realized is that the conditions in an urban context change. There might be sunlight, there might be trees around, there might be concrete around, walls around, and which changes the growth pattern of the plants. So with that, I got the curiosity into the idea of urban farming, and that's when I learned about it over a year or so, and started practicing it, experimenting with it. And then I did a few workshops, maybe a handful of them in the cities of Gujarat, like Jamnagar, Ahmedabad, Rajkot. And then once I was traveling around the country, and then I met a friend called Ravi Gulati. He runs a place called Manzil. It's sort of a vocational school learned and taught by the students in Delhi. And he learned about what I was doing, and he said, "Why don't you come and do a workshop in Delhi as well?" So I said, "Sure." And then there was the first workshop that I did in 2014, which is almost 6 years after I had started the farming journey. And in that workshop, about 50 people came, and that's sort of where I feel the foundation of Edible Roots was laid. Although the name didn't come around for another 2 years. But that was the idea. So through that workshop, a lot more people asked me to come and do workshops within their societies and communities or their associations, and also helping them handhold and set their gardens in the rooftops. So that's how the first journey started for us in terms of edible roots. We were known for creating kitchen gardens, and we are still known for creating kitchen gardens in backyards and rooftops. That's the primary bread and butter that we have. So that's how we started out. And it since I already knew farming, also some people also asked us to grow on larger pieces of land, which could be an acre or less, or eventually now even hundreds of acres, where we help people farm in a proper organic way on their land and designing the land in a proper way to harvest the resources, water, land, soil, air, and using the science called permaculture. So all of this happened during this time. Then after about 3 years of doing this, by this time the company had been formed. A team of about 5 or 6 people had been formed. We had almost about 500 customers who had done kitchen gardens by now in Delhi NCR. And a lot of them said, "Oh, we are growing and for now a few years, but we still feel this is not giving us all that we want. It only fulfills a very small percentage of our food requirements as a family." So that's when and I had sort of very briefly experimented with this idea back home in Gujarat also in the early years. But there, of course, it was a failure because maybe the time was not right, or that was not the right context for this. But here in Delhi, this idea of farmlet then came about. So we got a farm of one of our clients only. They offered it to us that you can use our farm to create this model. And so we created this model, and that farm is still operational. That's near Gurgaon. And so that was the first farmlet we created. This was in 2018. August of 2018, we laid the first farm, and we had initially about 100 families or so who joined this. And through that process, then we learned as to how this whole idea of mini farms and farm letting works is. And then now that we've been doing it for about 4 years now, we have improved and almost sort of, I would feel that we have perfected the idea of how to create the right engagement for the people who want to come and grow their food, who don't have enough space, or who feel they want more space beyond just their kitchen garden to grow all that they need. So that's how the farmlets idea was born.
Well, interesting. As you said, moving from big farms to then doing small rooftop gardens and home gardens, and then going back to big farms and then doing it as farmlets is a good transition. As you said, it takes time, and 10 years is probably a justified time for this transition. Now, important point is like when people listen, they would like to know like what is the minimum commitment that is required to get started with this. Of course, the easiest way is to attend your workshop or events and then learn from that and do some kitchen garden or home gardens or things like that. But if they were to subscribe to a farmlet, what is the minimum commitment and what are the general practices like in this business?
So initially, when we started out in 2018 with the farmlets, we had narrowed down to this idea that people need to commit for at least 6 months. So that's what we started out with. For the first 2.5 years, we were working on that plan where people committed for 6 months and they renewed every 6 months.
Okay.
But what we realized during this first 2-3 years was that there are certain times of the year when the season is much more favorable, and the farming experience and the food that comes out of it is much more favorable and encouraging as compared to other times of the year, like a summer time when it's too hot, or monsoon when it rains a lot. So people chose the favorable times, but not the unfavorable times.
Typical.
And also it created a lot of turmoil for us, and it also sort of deviated from the whole idea that we had in mind, that people come and experience what a farmer experiences as part of their growing cycle throughout the year. So it was a tough decision for us, but after 3 years, which is almost now a year ago or year and a half ago, we decided that we'll now ask people to commit for at least 12 months.
Fair.
They can pay on a month-to-month basis, but we take a deposit amount that through which they commit to us that they'll at least stick around for one whole year. Then they can just stay on a month-to-month basis as long as they like, or they leave if they want. So because we want them to at least experience once the whole yearly life cycle of a farm, all the seasons, all the intricacies of a season, and how we are meant to understand. Because nowadays what's happened is that everything is available throughout the year at your doorstep very easily.
Correct.
But that's not how things grow in nature. We feel, oh, tomatoes are available in the market right now. Why are we not getting it on our farm? And that's essentially when we understand that practically tomatoes in Delhi will only grow for about 4 months in a year. That's the remaining 8 months they're coming from somewhere else. And even the 4 months that they can grow here, nobody is growing here. They're always coming from somewhere else.
Correct.
So that's when you start realizing that even the most basic staple things that you take for granted, like potatoes or onions or tomatoes that are available throughout the year, let alone all the exotics which are also available now throughout the year, that's not possible. If you want to eat in tune with nature, if you want to experience food as it's meant to be, then you have to really engage and experience one life cycle, 1 year of the entire farm. So that's when we have stuck to it now, and after about 15-18 months that we have implemented this, I feel that we made the right decision. It's filtered out a few people. A lot of people have left. A lot of new ones have joined. But the ones that are joining now, they are sticking around because they realize what this is. Initially, we had a lot of people who were just fancying the idea, who want to try it out, which was not our intention. Our intention was to bring the true sort of people who want to commit to this learning journey of how farming is meant to be, what food growing and eating from the land where you grow is meant to be. So I think that's what it has come down to now, and it's working quite well in terms of people sticking around for the long run.
I really like this idea that you expect certain fruits and vegetables only during a certain part of the time of the year, and that's really good because, as you rightly said, eating something that's natural to your region is something that is well advised by even doctors and others. They're saying because that suits your body and that's how you have grown or accustomed to. So that's good in a way. Now, rooftop gardens, farmlets, and everything is kind of progressing well. So what's next for edible roots? So what are your next plans? I know that you currently operate farmlets in the northern part of India, but are you looking for expanding? Or if you're looking for expanding, what kind of partners or collaborators are you looking in this space?
There are multiple ways we are growing. Bangalore is our next destination. We have already been forming some partnerships and alliances over there.
Nice.
And that's sort of our next step in terms of expansion, in terms of geography. But what we've also been doing is further finding ways to engage people with their food and how food relates to their health. So we have also opened a farm kitchen now at our farmlets that we have in Delhi NCR. A farm kitchen is essentially a pop-up kitchen where we invite chefs, home chefs, local chefs, or people who run small food enterprises. They come and curate different menus using the local food, various cuisines around the country, trying to identify different plants that can grow, but we don't know how to use them. So that's being curated every weekend during the favorable months in terms of weather through that period, and through that make people further experience, that what you're growing, how that eventually reaches to our palates in terms of the various ways and the recipes and the whole Indian sort of palette that we have, the diverse range of cuisines that we have in our country. So, and it's also not only Indian, it's also a lot of cuisines are also from out of India. So this is sort of one extension of our work. We still continue to do our workshops. We also do online, a lot of them now, because that's how the things have changed after COVID. We are also connecting with a lot of farmers and the land projects that we have, the larger farms that we manage around the country. They have surplus of various produce, so we connect that also to the consumers living in the cities. For example, we have mangoes growing at a farm in Odisha, so we bring them here. We make mango pickle. We have a farm here in Delhi itself where we grow amlas. So we make chawanprash, we make pickles, we make candy, we make murabba, all kinds of things from that amla, and bringing that to people also over here. So the farmlets and the kitchen gardens address one portion of what we eat at home, which is mostly fresh greens, vegetables, salads, herbs. But now also there's a huge part of our diet which includes grains, pulses, oils, and the spices and the various other things that come along with our food, the fruits as well. So this all can't necessarily be grown on a kitchen garden in the quantities you might want, or a farmlet. So the larger or the long-term vision is to make the consumer, make the person eating the food connect with what they are eating, which is essentially knowing 3 answers about what they are eating: who is growing, where, and how. And for a farmlet or a kitchen garden, that's very obviously known. But even for other things that we're eating, the fruits, the grains, the pulses, who is growing it, from where is it coming from, how is it grown? What was the process of growing it? Is it grown keeping, of course, the organic processes in mind, but also are they taking care of the land, the water around them? So this is the next dimension. So in terms of geography, we are looking at Bangalore next, but in terms of our areas of work, this is also how we are expanding in terms of what all we bring to our clients.
The menu definitely is appetizing. I must admit that the range of products that you're trying to get chefs involved in cooking. So that's really interesting. And in geography, yes, Bangalore is a big market. Now, since the podcast audience is also quite outside India as well, are you doing any online workshops that international listeners can also participate in?
We do a lot of the online ones have been through corporates for their employees or for their target, and like we did one for a large bank recently. So their audience, their employees from the entire Southeast Asia, all the countries were there.
Okay.
There were almost 500-600 people who had participated. So in that sense, we're doing. Of course, the online workshops are open across the world. We don't have that kind of reach yet. I mean, we are still mostly known well in India. So, but they are available on our social media. We do announce them. So as people become aware of it internationally, we would be happy to host them.
Definitely, the story definitely is definitely an interesting one, and the work you do is definitely having real traction, and the results are clearly visible closer to you as a consumer. So, Kapil, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. Personally, I learned a lot about organic farming and how the entire business value proposition around having farmlets work. So thanks very much for taking time to join me on the podcast today. And I will leave the links to connect with you and the events section of your website. If any online event comes up, people from around the world can definitely subscribe and sign up for the event.
Lovely. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Well, that was a wrap on a feature conversation. I certainly learnt more about organic farming and other intricacies in growing food. Well, the next time you find any vegetable all year round in your nearby market, you can certainly tell it has traveled a long distance to get there. I'm sure you'll be interested to know more about getting your hands dirty, which by the way should be the only action item from this episode. So, I will leave the links to connect with Kapil and the Edible Roots team in the description of this episode. Well, if you're not based in India, no worries. Thanks to technology, you will be able to sign up for online workshops. So please do check them. And another link that you should definitely check is terrageneration.com, who are all about content and storytelling of people and organizations who work in the sustainability space. Thanks to Jacob and team for putting together the artworks that catch your eye before you listen to any episode. Finally, as a precursor to the next episode, which is going to be a different one on the unique selling propositions or the unique value propositions of businesses in the sustainability space, here's what Kapil had to say about the value differentiator of Edible Roots.
So I think the USP I think that we bring at Edible Roots, which I feel that compared to what others in our domain are doing, is one, the integration of the various things we are doing. So from workshops to kitchen gardens to farmlets, like there are companies who do just farmlet type activities or kitchen garden type activities or just workshops, but there are very few who bring this all together and together because they are very integrated and it's like a web. So I think that's one USP that we have is how we bring this all together. The second is that a lot of people who are doing this do not necessarily have a farming background.
Correct.
So a lot of our team members, including me, who have farmed for years, who have themselves farmed the land for years, and that brings a deeper understanding of what a person experiences as they're growing, whether it's a kitchen garden or a farmlet or anywhere else. So I think those two things is what makes our offering more genuine and unique and fulfilling for the customer.
So yes, the next episode in 2 weeks' time is going to be an interesting one. So make sure you subscribe. The podcast is available on all platforms: Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and so on. So with that, this is Girish Shivakumar signing off. And as always, thank you for listening.